York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is getting support from an unlikely source in her bid to become the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee.
I want to ask you about AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, announcing her bid for the top Democrat spot on your committee. What are your thoughts? Would you like to co-chair with her?
I'm a big AOC fan. Obviously, I don't agree with very much of her policy, but I think she's a good person. I think she's very well spoken. I did not have a good relationship with Jamie Raskin. I don't think that's any secret.
You heard right. That is indeed House Oversight Committee Chairman, Republican James Comer, backing the New Yorker. AOC is running to replace Maryland Representative Jamie Raskin, who has served as the ranking committee member on the oversight panel for the past 2 years.
It seems like the fireworks fizzled for Democrats, though, on another committee. New York Representative Jerry Nadler announced Wednesday that he is dropping his bid to remain the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and is instead throwing his support behind, you guessed it, Jamie Raskin.
Now, these are powerful positions. The Judiciary Committee conducts oversight of the executive branch and the federal judiciary. It also has the authority to impeach federal officials, including the president. Well, I think, to be clear, it has the capacity to move impeachment articles before any constitutional lawyers in our audience take exception to how we exactly phrased that. But, well, I want to hear your views on all of this. To me, one of the most interesting strands in what we've just talked about is AOC's move to become, I would say, less of an outside figure within the Democratic Party and within Democratic politics. When she was first elected, she was, for example, really quite antagonistic toward Nancy Pelosi, who was then Speaker. There was, if I recall correctly, a sit-in in Pelosi's office over the Green New Deal, which AOC was very supportive of. Now, she is still obviously a figure of the left, although she has drawn some more frustration from people on what I would, I guess, term the hard left in recent months. She's obviously positioning herself more as a sort of progressive, but within the mainstream of the party, and I find that interesting.
Yeah, I think that's true, and there was a lot of criticism, as you said, from really hardcore progressives of her first couple of years in Congress because they felt like she had betrayed them a bit by voting along party lines on some issues that maybe wouldn't have been as obvious from the way that she ran her campaign. But then you hear rumors that she's considering a 2028 presidential run, and it kind of starts to make sense. Maybe she is more interested in power than she lets on when she's talking about being the sort of progressive populist voice of the left. Yeah. And these comments from James Comer are not all that surprising to me. People who have met AOC and who work with her say that she's very pleasant. She's relatively easy to work with. She is someone that you like to have a glass of wine with, even if you don't agree with her policy positions, and I think that's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I hope you're now not just like incinerated in the comments for saying something nice about AOC from the right-leaning
I'd get a drink with her.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, even among media members, I think she is generally seen in quite a positive light as a person. Like, she resembles a real human being, and she's quite, friendly and solicitous of people and all of that. So that, to my mind, is an interesting part of this. I guess the other broader topic, firstly, like, credit to James Comer for actually saying those things about her, which was, they were constructive things to say. The other big part of this is sort of what the Democrats do in the wake of having lost the presidential election and lost control of the Senate and failing to regain control of the House, a unified Republican government. That is causing all sorts of soul-searching among Democrats, many who argue that there needs to be really significant change, that the party is losing working class voters, that it's out of step with those sensibilities. And then I've also seen, people making counter-arguments about that. Hakeem Jeffries this week was talking about how below the presidential level, the Democratic Party had actually fared quite well in a number of the battleground states, and he was contending that it is important not to exaggerate the changes that need to happen. That's too long a debate to get into without letting you have your say, because I thought you looked skeptical about the Hakeem Jeffries argument. Go for it.
There's a lot of reasons to take issue with that, not least of which is that with the way that congressional districts are currently mapped out, it is difficult for Republicans to perform much better than they did in this election. So I think looking at the pure seat differential doesn't really tell the whole story that Hakeem Jeffries would like it to tell. But you're right. This is going to be interesting to see how they operate in Congress post a pretty crushing defeat, especially when we look at these two races for these top committee positions, right? Because you have Jamie Raskin, who's part of the sort of Democratic establishment, simply moving over from one powerful committee to another, but then you have a potential somewhat of a disruptor, even though, you know, AOC has kind of towed the party line and been more friendly to leadership than she had, the people suspected she would have been in the past. She still is more progressive than the average Democrat. Her lobbying for the oversight position would be a new change in the Democratic Party.
I'm sorry, but a generational change also, you know,
exactly.
which I think is
a
part of the
generational
importance.
change, which I think matters. But all of that being said, most common conceptions of what went wrong with the election was that the Democrats went too far left.
Yeah.
So, okay, you have a younger progressive person, but is that really getting to the heart of why Democrats underperformed?
So what I would say about that is sometimes when I look at the election, I think it is a little too overgeneral to cast it entirely in left, right, or left versus centre-left terms, because people like Bernie Sanders, for example, would make the argument that the problem isn't exactly defined in that way. It's that economic left-wing policies were not prominent enough. And I think by implication, at least, Sanders would suggest identity-led politics of the left or of a progressive nature was too prominent. So then you get into these issues of, you know, particularly the trans rights issue, which you and I have talked about before, as being a political loser, not only because lots of people don't agree with the most assertive element of the pro-trans rights community, but also because those debates detract from, you know, increasing the minimum wage or greater labour protections or things that speak more directly to working class voters.
The only problem with his assessment, though, is that in the current Democratic Party, you can't separate economic left from cultural left to any significant degree. Even Bernie Sanders, who wants to get away from identity politics, is completely opposed to the American majority on things like immigration and crime. So I'm just not sure that I buy that those two things can be separated with who the Democratic Party currently has as their standard bearer progressives.
I think this is the argument that I think even some in the more, well, again, we're getting into that center-left kind of terminology, but there is an argument that the Democratic Party has become increasingly dominated by very affluent, very socially progressive or left-wing white people, essentially. Well, not only white people, but predominantly. And therefore it has got distanced from a more non-college going working class element that had at one time been the bedrock of the Democratic Party. And I think that the argument is not necessarily the abandonment of one over the other, but where the emphasis falls. And certainly, I mean, the Trump people would tell you that one of their most effective ads was the ad against Kamala Harris on the trans issue about Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you, or words to that effect. And so I think that is a genuine part of this whole debate.
Okay.
There we go. Half in agreement, half not. The way we like it here on Rising. More topics after this.